But so, is anyone else seeing the video? Because I can see myself in the Zoom. Okay, I'm afraid that my Zoom settings... Do you have idea how to show both video and slides? Okay? Okay, I'm not trying to make any more clever setup to have my proper camera working. But so, the topic was, the topic was on actuality of anarchism, because, well, it's obviously, we are talking about 19th century movement and political theory, which obviously in some extent exists. Yeah. Okay. Okay, is it any better? Yeah. Yeah, good. So it's a question if this political theory, a movement which was born in the 19th century, is still has some actuality today. So I have to... So, but first about some definitions and meaning. So, anarchism is like ancient Greek term, but in the Greek context, we are talking about, it means more like disorder or chaos. Like literally means without a ruler. This is without an archia. Arch in ancient Greece is a ruler. But for ancient Greeks, state or city, as we are talking about the city-state, is in a state of chaos or disorder if it doesn't have a ruler. And this is a concept which anarchist thinkers started to question in the 19th century. So the second meaning is a 19th century political philosophy and movement, but there is also more and more a growing set of meanings which basically somehow are connected to original meanings in the sense of being without rules. So, for example, in the philosophy of science, there is Feyerabend's epistemological anarchism, which basically the idea that there is no any fixed or regular rules in the development of science. Then there is term relationship anarchism, which is kind of non-monogamic relationship without any predetermined roles and so on. So, but this is obviously not any close, this doesn't have any close connection to first or second meaning. But so, like anarchism and anarchy day nowadays, these terms come across in many contexts, but we are now basically concentrating on the second meaning. But the second meaning, how it's connected to the first one, that it's actually a provocation of Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, 19th century thinker, who is the first person who defined himself of anarchism. So basically, we are talking about, it's part of he was part of the socialist movement, also radical Democrat and Republican movement in the 19th century. But this self-definition as anarchism, it was also a sort of provocation. The goal was to question the power relations in the society of this time. And so this is, and this provocation is also, it has a good and bad aspect, because often anarchists are quite frustrated of the discussion of that or the concept that anarchists basically just want to wreak chaos and disorder, but also this is kind of self-caused, because anarchists in the first place, they decided to have this word to describe their own ideology. So it was kind of a provocation which was both harmful and useful, because it guaranteed that there is still existing interests and to anarchism, and it still exists as a historical concept, pretty much. Maybe because of this provocation, because there are many other similar kinds of movements or related movements, like maximalism or social revolutionaries, so-called SRs, and narodniks, various 19th and 20th century movements which have been somehow similar to anarchism, but they are forgotten, maybe because they didn't have such easy and memorizable label. Actually, already in the 19th century, some anarchists got frustrated with this label, and they preferred to call themselves libertarian communists or libertarian socialists. But this term is also somehow now forgotten, and there is a libertarian political movement which is completely different and doesn't have much historical connection with anarchism. Basically, it's a sort of extreme capitalism. So the whole so this is why we are still talking about anarchism and not, for example, about libertarian socialism, which is still being used as a term, but it's overshadowed by more right-wing libertarian, so-called libertarianism. For example, in the United States, there is a Libertarian Party. It's basically extreme laissez-faire liberalism. But so basic ideas of Proudhon. His most famous, maybe, slogan of Proudhon is that property is theft. That basically all the injustices in the society, or most of the injustice in the society, is happening around the concept of private property and protection of private property, which is excluding vast majority of the population. Also, he believed in the society, that society is and state, they are not connected, but they are connected, but in the antagonistic way, that the state tries to crush the society, which is an organization in its own and is capable of replacing the functions of the state. So for Proudhon, and for basically all the social anarchists after him, the society is a force against the state. But Proudhon was not revolutionary. He didn't believe in revolutions, on violent overthrowing of the system. He believed in organizations of economic cooperatives. Also, he had a concept of the People's Bank, which would finance cooperatives without this profit-making motivation. But also Proudhon had many ideas which were reactionary even in the 19th century scale. For example, he was extreme sexist and racist and so on. So this is why often Proudhon, like when anarchists talk about Proudhon, they are only picking his main points, but not so much as a person. We can just say that as a person, Proudhon is cancelled nowadays. But Proudhon already had connection to art scene of his time. This picture of Proudhon is actually painted by Gustav Courbet, who was also the first realists who formulated the realist artist program that artists should be describing the reality around them and also problems of the working class. And also basically pretty much all the artistic tendencies from the 19th century to middle of the 20th century, they had some overlapping with the anarchist movement of their time. For example, in Impressionism, Camille Pissarro was very much connected to anarchist movement of his time and highly connected. In Futurism, there is less connection, but for example, Carlo Cara in the I think in 1912 had the important futuristic painting about funeral of an anarchist who tried to also catch the spirit of radical workers' movement of his time. Like as we probably all know, the futurist movement then also, like especially the Italian futurists, they joined the fascist movement, but there was also a left wing in futurism, which also included Malevich, who later on developed suprematism, the complete abstract form of art. And he was connected to some avant-garde anarchists early in the 20th century Russia, and also wrote to this avant-garde anarchist papers. Juan Gris, Spanish painter who mostly worked in France. The background of this presentation is actually by Juan Gris, and finally André Breton of Surrealists. He was not a political sectarian, and Breton also cooperated with the Communist Party, but he was closely connected with different anarchist fractions in France. But yeah, I don't go so much in detail. Probably there are other people participating in this series who would be more competent to talk about art history. This is just examples of interests of artists towards anarchism in these years, and the discussions what was in these intersections what were taking place in the 19th century. There were discussion about meaning of the art, what's the purpose of the artists, and for example, should art be propaganda for the anarchist or revolutionary workers' cause, or maybe it should be have some value in itself and not just the propagandistic message. But yeah, I will a bit later discuss if these questions anymore are so much actual anymore. But one of the people who contributed to this discussion is Pierre Kropotkin, which in base is maybe the person who formulated anarchism as people who are nowadays in the anarchist movement would understand the movement. So Proudhon was mutualist. He didn't believe in communism. He was kind of a moderate socialist, believing in the cooperative movement. But Kropotkin was communist, so basically he formulated a kind of synthesis of earlier anarchist ideas and Marxism. So what is communism? Communism is the idea that everything belongs to everyone and everything should be free. So it's basically refusal of both not only capitalism but monetary economy. The basic point is that the production in the modern society is so complicated, everyone's efforts are included in it. Also, consumers' efforts are important because they are choosing what they want to demand, and they are providing information and so on, and of course money for the production. So everything is so much interconnected that it's not even possible to imagine some sort of justified spread of the resources. Another point of Kropotkin for which he is still known is his theory about mutual aid. As we know, the evolution is also 19th century scientific concept, and at very early stage the evolution started to drift down to social theory and became social Darwinism, survival of the fittest, which is quite important element in the liberal theory. Also the competition of nations against each other, the companies and also individuals, still very much in the center of liberal discussion. So we can see the time we are opening some business paper, for example. But Kropotkin, basically he was a geographer, and also, as a side note, he was one of the persons who first developed a theory about ice ages. But this time, being geographist, you also should have a wide knowledge of the biology and the different countries and people. So he also made published investigation about mutual aid in the animals and plant kingdoms. So this is and this is nowadays also, it's still living. There is this discussion about Gaia, about everything on this planet to be interconnected, and understanding about the meaning of the biodiversity. So basically animals are and plants, they are not just and living beings, they are not just destroying each other, but in many ways dependent on each other and also supporting each other's existence. It's not only parasitism, but many often there is like mutual supporting mechanisms. So and there is still lots of, it's even like still existing discussion like how much there is interdependency between environmental systems, and but somehow often Kropotkin is not remembered. There is more links in this discussion to 20th century thinkers, but basically this whole concept pretty much comes from Kropotkin, and it's very connected to his political thinking. Also, he believed that anarchism is born in everyday struggles. It's not some abstract philosophy or idea, but everything that is present in the anarchist theory, it's based on some ongoing struggles. And also, communities should be based on voluntary association, so no any coercive state apparatus or capitalist corporations forcing people to do what is not in their own interest. And what's Kropotkin's point in this to this discussion of art, or his contribution, was that there should not be division of labor to creative and manual. That everyone should be free to do creative work and to express themselves. And actually, main problem of state and capital is that they are not letting people do this. So in Kropotkin, in anarchist communism, there is no artist profession. Everyone would be an artist, which means that there is no special artist specialty. But so, how is this discussion relevant in the 21st century? Because we see art scene which is very different from the 19th century situation. So we see that art is being a hugely, it's very important part of the capitalist production of value, and also very lucrative investment opportunity. The work is more and more creative. There is less and less I mean, the share of manual work or industrial production in the overall productionist value is less and less. It's of course still huge. We have this endless factories in China and stuff is being shipped here with these massive container ships every day. But still, in terms of value, the creative labor is more and more important, and bigger and bigger share of the value is connected with art. But also in the same time, there is extremely unequal distribution of this demand between artists, and artists have to compete with this scarce, or not even scarce resources. Like there is a huge amount of money around art, but it's very unequally distributed. So all the artists have to constantly and every day compete against each other. Even if you have an artist collective and you do collective projects, you are in the competition against the other collectives. And to survive in this competition, you have to have relevance, and to be relevant, you must, especially during the last 10 years, you have to have some sort of message or idea or connection to society, which I call in the general terms of politics, which is obviously maybe not the best term to describe these things, like is feminism always politics, for example, or intersectionalism or anti-racism. Maybe it's not. But anyway, I didn't came with any better term. You can maybe propose something. You somehow actually have to have this kind of you have to have some position, you have to have some social commentary or environmental or whatever commentary. It cannot be whatever, but you have to have something to be relevant and to survive in this competition. So basically, it's not so much questions like in the 19th century, the discussion that how to should we have a message. You should have some sort of message, but is this message even connected in to something which is happening around in the society? Can you have impact? It's more and more difficult because of this huge amount of commentary and messages everyone has to send somehow. So there is basically two questions which are much more relevant in the 21st century than this 19th century discussion which I was referring. Like first is, can anarchism provide you with relevancy, grants and fame in the art world? And the second is, can anarchism help artists and cultural workers to organize as a class against this capitalist exploitation? So these first questions I'm trying to discuss today in this remaining 15 minutes or half an hour, and the second I would discuss tomorrow if someone would like to join for a second day. But for the first questions I have to go to some concepts which maybe are already familiar to everyone. So first is the tournament. It's like turning expressions of the capitalist system and its media culture against itself. So this term originated from surrealism in the mid of the 20th century. This is basically example. I don't know if this is actually so much art. This is anti-advertisement by the Heirakat collective from Finland. Well, it's against the sweatshop production of clothes and basically taking advertisement of Levi's Corporation and turning it against itself. And this was, so this is what is the tournament. So this is the original concept, but in the 60s there was there is another example. This is some Banksy work, kind of, which maybe has some message criticizing the social media impact and invasion of our space, or maybe not. I don't know. Banksy works maybe don't have so much. Like I tried to actually look for some Banksy work which would have anti-capitalist message, but I couldn't find. So maybe he has a commentary, for example, against Israel occupation in Palestine, so I wouldn't say that his position is explicitly like vague politically. In some context he is very clear with his message, but about capitalism I cannot really say. But the opposite context, so, is the recuperation. It's basically a process by which politically radical ideas and images are cooked within capitalism. And this is basically this is the opposite of, it's kind of the tournament but opposite, when radical stuff is becoming counter-revolutionary. And this picture, I don't know if it's visible enough, but this is a promoted tweet I got yesterday, and I took a screenshot. And it's basically, this is some company which is making investment portfolio with art. So they are advertising art is stable in chaotic times. Contemporary art posts strong returns with less volatility in 2020. You can Banksy calls Monet and more. I didn't check what is the site. I don't know if this company is basically, if it owns Banksy or if it's maybe it is some sort of hedge fund, but instead of some company shares you can buy art. And this can be very good if you are a very rich person and you have $10,000 extra money. So you can basically invest to Banksy and become a Banksy owner and so on. So which is, I don't know, like it doesn't really, to me, it doesn't sound that this is point of the Banksy, but who knows? Maybe it is. So, but anyway, I should actually have a bit like definition what is capitalism, because it's often, capitalism is discussed in kind of lazy manner, that we are this and this, and capitalism is what is evil in this society, and people are poor because of capitalism and whatever, but there is not so much, maybe we are missing the definition. So I basically, there are two first definition is maybe the less common, but it's more popular in at least certain part of the Marxist and socialist discussions. So economic system dominated by accumulation of circulating capital. What is circulating capital? It's basically, it's money, but money is not always capital. Like if you have your wage and go to shop, then your money is not capital. But if you are stashing your money in the bank account until you have 50,000 and then you buy shares, or maybe if you have instead of 50,000 you have 5 million and you buy a factory, then it's capital, circulating capital, which is used to make some investments. There is more common definition is that it's economic system dominated by private ownership of means of production. Obviously this is connected, because if there is private ownership, there are people making some investments, and if there is many enough people making investments, the economic system is dominated by investment. But there is so basically second definition pretty much leads to the first definition, but not necessarily the opposite, because also the former Eastern Bloc systems like Soviet Union, they fulfill the first definition, but not the second one. So basically, if we want to stress similarities with Soviet Union and other Eastern Bloc countries, we can pick the first definition, but if not, then if we want to see this as different, we pick the second. For anarchists, basically there is no necessary such a big difference between the Soviet system and the Soviet Union system and capitalism. So I would say that anarchists and also anti-authoritarian Marxists, they would pick the first definition. And maybe at this point it's maybe needless to say that every anarchist tendency, we have this far discussed two tendencies, there will be more tendencies tomorrow. We have discussed mutualism and anarcho-communism. And these tendencies are obviously against capitalism, but all the other tendencies are as well. But so, we are going back to determinant and recuperation, and these are terms which were popularized and invented, as far as I know, as far as the recuperation go, invented by Situationist International, which is also has been said that it's the last avant-garde tendency in the art. So some other concepts of the Situationist International, it's situation actually it comes from the Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre. It's because he was discussing on the world where you are put to situation, you cannot influence yourself, but situationists, they tried to create these situations themselves to somehow break this mundane cycle of everyday boring consumerist living. And they made different, especially in the early years, they made actions like they took metro map of London and went to wander the German countryside trying to use this map and this sort of performances. They also went to some presentation of Charles Chaplin in Paris because they considered Chaplin as a completely outdated artist. And society of spectacle, it's also important situationist concept. It was basically the idea is that we are living in the society which is centered around the situations, that we are cannot much influence. Everything is predetermined how we should react to different things. Like there is mass media, it's bombing us with some messages and whatever. So, for example, there is Prince Philip, the British monarch, died, and we should have some reaction that, oh, we are so sorry that this dear husband of the Queen has died, but maybe also even this opposite reactions, the Republicans can criticize and anti-monarchists can criticize that why someone should be around governing us for all of his life and whatever. But everything is predetermined. There is no any space for any surprise or wonder in the society around us. And this picture, actually, this is from Denmark. There was in '64 some situationists. This was already after some splits in the organization. This was, I think, Asger Jorn. They made action or situation of stealing head of the Little Mermaid in Copenhagen, basically because it was symbol of some outdated and uninteresting corrupted form of art. So, but this was already when the Situationist International had split to several fractions, and it continued splitting later on. So its situationists are inspired by anarchism and anti-Leninist Marxism, maybe more about more inspired with some anti-Leninist Marxist tendencies, so-called council communists, which formed in 20s and 30s against totalitarian tendencies in the Soviet Union, mainly in Holland and Germany to some extent, and later on were crushed by Nazis. But also, and this is maybe the main influence of situationists, but they were also linking to anarchist thinkers. And it has been said that situationist movement, especially because they were had some influence in student movement. For example, in Strasbourg, they also published important pamphlet on poverty of the student life with some student union money and distributed thousands of copies. It was a big scandal in Strasbourg. And it has been said that even if situationists didn't participate so much to 68 events in Paris, they were important inspiration with their discussion about the society of spectacle and the modern conditions of students. But also, it's quite notorious. Situationists are quite notorious for their internal conflicts. They first excluded all the artists because they kind of considered. Eventually, they went to make a conclusion that art in the current society, it will always be recuperated, and it's not possible to make art which doesn't become a commodity for the capitalism. So basically they kicked out all the artists from their international, and they concentrated to political work, and but eventually what happened that they started to exclude other political activists or intellectuals as well, and eventually in 1972 it was only 2 members left, and they kind of abolished the whole Situationist International. So basically they kind of cancelled themselves and made conclusions that even any kind of politics eventually will be recuperated. So, which is kind of sad that you cannot actually do anything in the modern society. Hopefully that's not the case. But so back to this question, can anarchism provide you with relevancy grants and fame in the alt world? So we have here is picture. This is maybe not so obvious to people living outside of Finland, but this is Aalto Easter egg, which you can buy in the shop with €1.15, and it has the sign of anarchy in it. This anarchist sign, it was already used during the Spanish Civil War by Spanish anarcho-syndicalists in the 30s, but it was popularized during the same Paris riots of 68, which were maybe inspired by the Situationist International. But now it's a logotype of a punk band which became a big unsuccessful capitalist enterprise and is supporting the right-wing Kokoomus party and is selling you the Easter eggs in the shop with €1.50. And Situationist Internal would say that maybe anarchism can provide you with relevancy grants and fame in the alt world, but success in the alt world would mean that you would immediately be recuperated, and that's end of your anti-capitalism and anarchism. But on the other hand, if everything in any way is being recuperated, like what can you do? Like any kind of, it's obvious that there are successful social movements. Many things in the society are changing in the better situations, so maybe recuperation is something you shouldn't be so much worried about, but just to do your stuff and to move forward. So it's kind of more positive interpretation of the situationist term. So this was us for the first question, but as introduction to second. The second question is it possible to organize artists as a class to fight against capitalism? I have a short kind of sidestep to discuss direct democracy and why anarchists are supporting direct democracy. So this is more connected. Like tomorrow I will talk more about relationship of anarchists and Marxism and different syndicalist movements and self-organizations. So this is a bit like introduction to tomorrow's topic. So nowadays we are discussing that the Western, for example, there is a democracy in Finland or democracy in Denmark. For United States, there are elections, we can freely choose our party, but this is, of course, not the original meaning of democracy. Original meaning of democracy was something completely different. It comes from the ancient Greek, and the point of the democracy was that everyone is making decisions together in the general meeting. Obviously, in Athens, there were many groups that were excluded from the general meetings, for example, women, slaves, migrants, and so on. But the whole concept doesn't necessarily mean that someone has to be excluded. And republic, it's not a Greek term, it's a Roman term. There is surprisingly small difference. This is almost in the same time when Romans decided to get rid of their king. There is a legend that they actually sent people to Greece to find inspiration for their constitution. This is maybe just a legend, but obviously Romans were inspired by the Greek colonies in the southern Italy. And they took something from the Athens model, but also something from the Sparta model, which can be said that ancient Sparta was the first constitutional dictatorship. And they develop a representative democracy. When you are choosing your representatives, and next 1 or 2 years they do basically whatever they want, as long as the stuff that they do is legal, or maybe semi-legal or not so legal, but anyway, you can do nothing until the next elections. In Athens, there were very few elected responsibilities, basically only related to wars. Pretty much all the civilian duties, they were randomly chosen. Like whoever had to do some, like they were just drawing a lot, and somebody had to do the thing, but no elections. So there were always some democracies and republics existing during the Middle Ages. None of these were socialists or communists. All of these were ruled by more or less richer elements. Mostly these were city-state, but Iceland was completely democratic and using direct democracy for almost, actually more than 300 years. And Pihkova, it's Tipo, it's actually, it's Pihkova only in Finnish, it's Pskov. So I would say Iceland was democracy. Switzerland, basically rural cantons, they were more democracies. Cities were more oligarch republics. But yeah, maybe I don't go so much to this in detail. Novgorod is important example because it was governing huge areas in the Eastern Europe and also Finland. But I don't go so much to this in detail because none of these were necessary super democratic in the modern sense. But this is how there are still a couple of cantons in Switzerland which are using direct democracy. This is a general meeting in some of the smaller Swiss cantons. This is probably Appenzell in the Horden. And every 1 year there is a general meeting where everyone can come and they are making decisions of the budget and some other things. So about direct democracy in the 20th and 21st century. So we don't have any more societies which are using direct democracy during hundreds of years, but there are similar events. For example, Soviets, the original workers' councils in the two Russian revolutions, which eventually were had to submit to rule of the Communist Party, but originally they were independently running municipalities and big factories with some direct democratic meetings. And there was also a wave of workers' councils in Italy and Germany after the First World War. In Budapest, 1956, anti-Soviet uprising, and also Gwangju. There's a typo, this should be Gwangju in South Korea, 1980s. There were 3 days protest against the military dictatorship, which was basically not most, but maybe half or 1/3 of the city inhabitants were joining a continuous meeting in the central square, which was discussing strategies how to fight against. And some smaller protests like Indignados in Spain and different Occupy movements 10 years ago during the financial crisis, which were also basically gathering public assemblies in the city squares and making the common decisions. But what when it's not practical, maybe always to have everyone gathering? Like I live in Helsinki, probably many of the people in this, yeah. Okay, I tried to check. Is it now any better? No, I just checked my cable. Well, anyway, I'm almost finished, so yeah. Okay, but anyway, I'm almost finished, so just a couple of notes. So maybe it's not, but anyway, yeah, about the Middle Ages, it was important because the Kropotkin was at some point, he was in jail in St. Petersburg, and he had a chance. There was not much to do, so he had a chance to familiarize himself how the direct democracy was happening north of Russia during the Middle Ages. So this is why this Middle Age democratic practice is directly influencing the modern socialist and anarchist movements, even though there were many also problems in this medieval democratic and republican societies. But so maybe it's not always possible to have all city inhabitants in some continuous general meeting. People have other stuff to do, have to go to work or study or whatever, taking care of their families. So there is also another option, it's called imperative mandate, and this is more modern invention. As far as I know, this was first discussion by Rousseau in his book about social contract in the 18th century. So maybe elections, when politicians made some bids or they are balloting in some elections, maybe they should list what they are actually supporting, and they should not be allowed to vote differently from their promises. So basically this would make election promise obligatory, and breaking your pre-election promise would become illegal. But this was, even though of course French Revolution was much inspired by Rousseau, it was eventually banned in the French Revolution, and it's also banned in many modern constitutions, also in the Finnish constitutions. But it was used in practice in the Paris Commune 1872, which was basically the last kind of the first and last socialist revolution in the Western Europe, which I would discuss tomorrow when I will discuss more relationship with Marxism and anarchism. So, and for example, the Foucault and Chomsky debate in 1971, from where is this picture. But anyway, I guess I already talk even a bit more than I was planning to do, so I will switch off my recording and we can have some discussion. Okay, let's see if I switch off my recording. Maybe I have a bit more processor power to have a discussion. Just a second.